My name's Jacob Morris. This happened to me in the autumn of 2018. I was 32 back then, living in Derbyshire, England. I'd been working in construction for over a decade, and after a long stretch of back-to-back jobs, I had a few weeks off. I didn't want to spend it lying around or drinking at the local pub like most of my mates. I needed real quiet, somewhere out in the woods with no phone signal, no traffic noise, and no one bothering me. That's how I ended up planning a solo hunting and camping trip in a place I didn't know too well. There was a spot my uncle had taken me to once years ago in Northumberland, near a place called Kielder Forest. It was huge, rolling hills, thick woods, a lot of it untouched and empty. He used to say if you walked far enough in, you could go all day without seeing another person. That's exactly what I was looking for. I packed light but enough to get me through 5 or 6 days. Sleeping bag, tarp, food, water purifier, gas stove, ammo, and my old .308 rifle. I didn't tell many people where I was going. Just left a note with my sister in case something went wrong. Not that I thought it would. I drove out early one morning and parked at a remote trailhead I'd found on a map. There weren't even proper signs, just a lay-by and a thin track going into the trees. I locked up the car, shouldered my pack, and walked in. The first day was calm, quiet, exactly what I needed. I hiked for hours, deeper into the forest, past mossy rocks and old pine stumps, until I reached a small valley near a creek. The air smelled clean pine, wet soil, fallen leaves. No sound except the wind in the branches and the water running nearby. I pitched my tarp between 2 trees and made camp just before sunset. That night, I sat by the fire, ate some boiled rice and beans, and just listened. There were owls calling, the occasional rustle from a deer or badger, but nothing out of the ordinary. I felt safe. I slept well. The second day, I started hunting. I wasn't out for trophies, just something small like a roe deer or maybe a hare. I tracked quietly through the woods, checking old game trails. Found a few signs. Fresh droppings, some scuffed earth, and even a hoof print in the soft mud near a stream. I followed the trail uphill, away from camp, but didn't see anything worth shooting. That was fine. I had time. When I came back to camp later, I noticed something strange. My tarp looked off. One side was slightly sagging, and a corner peg had been pulled out. At first, I figured it was just the wind or maybe a curious animal, but the ground nearby didn't have any of the usual signs. No paw prints, no claw marks, nothing. Just the peg yanked out and a small scrape across the dirt near where my stove had been. I put it back and tightened the ropes. Probably nothing. Still, I kept my rifle closer that night. On the third day, I woke up to a faint noise. It was still dark, maybe 5:30 in the morning. I could hear light movement outside the tarp, leaves brushing against something. It wasn't fast or panicked like an animal. It was slow, careful. I didn't move. I just lay there, breathing through my nose, one hand on the rifle beside me. The sound circled halfway around my shelter and then stopped. Nothing for 5 minutes, then 10. Eventually, I built up the nerve to unzip the tarp and peek out. There was nothing there, just the gray light of morning starting to come in through the trees, fog hanging low over the forest floor. I stepped out slowly, boots crunching on the cold grass. I looked around, no movement, no sound. I walked a few meters out and saw something odd in the soil, a partial footprint. Not a boot, a trainer. Someone else had been out here. It wasn't recent, maybe from the day before, but it hadn't been there when I set up camp. I was sure of it. I stared at the print for a while, trying to decide if I was overreacting. It was possible a hiker had come through and left it. Still, it felt off. The direction it was facing pointed straight at my camp. That day, I stayed closer to the area and kept checking my surroundings. No signs of people, no more prints. Around noon, I spotted a young roe deer on a ridge about 200 meters away. I lined up the shot, fired and dropped it clean. I gutted it right there and packed the meat in a cloth sack I'd brought. The rest I buried, following the usual precautions. When I got back to camp, everything was where I left it. I cooked a bit of the meat and dried the rest for later. I tried to ignore the unease crawling up my back. That night, I didn't sleep well. I kept hearing small sounds. Not loud, but enough to keep waking me. Twigs snapping, leaves shifting. Then, sometime deep in the night, I heard what I knew wasn't an animal. It was a metallic clink, like something brushing against my stove. I sat up, heart pounding, and waited. I didn't want to shine my torch and give away my exact spot. After maybe a minute, I crept out with the rifle and scanned the area. Again, no one. Nothing moved. But my stove had shifted a few inches from where I'd left it. The wind couldn't have done that. The fourth day, I broke camp early and moved a few kilometers away. I didn't want to run into whoever it was. I hiked north, following the stream, and set up in a new spot under a thick cluster of trees. Felt more hidden. I camouflaged the tarp better this time, scattered leaves over anything reflective. I kept all my gear tight and close. I didn't want anything left lying around. Around mid-afternoon, I found another deer trail and followed it up into a small clearing. No deer, but I saw something that stopped me cold. In the center of the clearing, near a mossy log, was a tree with a branch snapped off about 6 feet up. Tied around the stub was a piece of twine, and dangling from it was a set of 3 rabbit feet, dried and knotted together. It wasn't a hunter's trap or some bushcraft thing. It looked like a marker. I walked around the tree carefully. Nearby were more rabbit bones, some charred like they'd been cooked, and what looked like the ashes of a very small fire, cold and dead. Someone else had camped here, and it wasn't recent. Maybe a few days, maybe a week. That night, I barely slept at all. I kept the rifle across my chest, my back against a tree. I didn't cook anything, didn't light a fire, just chewed on cold food and waited for daylight. On the 5th morning, I heard something while packing up. Distant but clear, a single gunshot. Not close, but not far enough either. Maybe a mile off. Could have been a hunter, sure, but it didn't feel right. The forest had been dead silent all morning, and then that one shot. I didn't wait around. I stuffed everything in my bag and moved out, this time heading east, back toward where I thought the road might be. I didn't care about the meat, the gear, I just wanted out. The forest felt different now. Not just quiet, but heavy, like it was watching. I kept checking behind me, ears straining for anything. I saw no one, heard nothing, but I never stopped looking. By the 6th day, I was rationing the last of my water and energy bars. My sense of direction was fraying. I hadn't seen a trail in 2 days. My phone was useless. The battery had died back on the 3rd night, and there hadn't been signal since I walked in. Then I saw something that nearly made me sit down in shock. It was a can of beans, sitting on a flat rock near a bend in the creek. Not old and rusted, new, clean, unopened, placed there deliberately. I didn't touch it. I just stared at it, then slowly backed away. I hiked for another hour, pushing through thick brush, and came across something else. Another tarp. This one was green, low to the ground, half collapsed like it had been abandoned fast. There were crushed leaves around it, no gear inside. Just the faint smell of smoke and something else. Something like sweat and old clothes. I didn't stay. I moved fast, heart thudding like it was going to tear out of my chest. That night, I didn't set up camp. I just huddled under a tree, shaking and listening. I thought about yelling for help, but I knew how far out I was. No one would hear. If someone was stalking me, yelling would only make things worse. The next morning, I found the trail. I don't know how. Maybe I'd looped back, or maybe I was just lucky. But it was a narrow track, barely there, leading downhill. I followed it for hours. My legs ached, my mouth was dry, but I didn't stop. Late that afternoon, I saw the car. My red hatchback was still there, parked under a thin line of trees. I staggered toward it, dropped my pack, and checked the doors. Still locked. I got in, started the engine, and just sat there for a while, breathing. Then I noticed the note on the windshield. It was under the wiper, folded once, no envelope. I reached out with shaking fingers and opened it. It said, in neat, blocky handwriting, "You're lucky." That was it. No name, no explanation, just those two words. I didn't sleep when I got home. I didn't unpack for days. I kept the note in a drawer, not because I wanted to remember it, but because part of me still can't believe it really happened. I never reported it. What would I say? That someone followed me through the woods for days without showing themselves? I haven't been hunting since, and I sure as hell never went back to Kielder. I was 36 years old when I decided to take a solo camping trip through the Peak District. It was late September of 2014, a time of year when the air started to cool down just enough that mornings came with mist clinging to the hills and evenings turned cold fast. I had time off work, no one to really answer to, and a quiet craving for stillness. I needed to get away from noise, from screens, from people. I'd always found peace in the hills, the wind in the grass, and the long dirt paths that seemed to stretch into nowhere. I picked a small area near Hope Valley, not too remote, but far enough off the usual tourist routes that I figured I'd have at least a couple days of quiet. I wasn't trying to push my limits or prove anything. I just wanted some space. I packed light, one-man tent, gas burner, simple food, knife, rain gear, some basic navigation tools.
No fancy satellite gear.
I didn't even bring a phone charger because I planned to shut it off the moment I pitched camp. The drive out was simple. I left Sheffield in the morning and was parked at a small gravel levee by early afternoon. There were no signs, no other cars, nothing around but moorland, trees, and the faint sound of wind cutting through. I followed an old path into the woods, rough but still visible. I must have walked for an hour and a half, steadily climbing uphill, until I found a little clearing surrounded by silver birch trees. Soft grass, flat enough for my tent. Felt right. I set up camp just before the sun began to dip. The woods were quiet, too quiet in a way that made you aware of your own movements. I remember the sharp sound of the tent poles clicking together, the dull snap of twigs under my boots, the whisper of wind in the birch leaves. That night was uneventful. I cooked some rice and beans, sat on a folded mat, and just listened to the world. When it got dark enough that I couldn't see my hand without the headlamp, I crawled into my sleeping bag and drifted off. The cold woke me a few times, and once I thought I heard a fox barking in the distance, but nothing strange, just the usual country sounds. The second day, I hiked a bit further inland. I didn't bring a map. I had the trail in my head and I wasn't going far. I spent most of the afternoon walking under a cloudy sky, the sort of overcast that feels like it might rain but never does. I saw some deer scat, some rabbit holes, but nothing big. I didn't see a single person. That was fine by me. I wanted quiet. I returned to camp just before dusk and noticed something that made my skin tighten. My tent flap was undone. At first, I thought maybe I hadn't zipped it fully. The wind could have tugged it loose, but I always double-check things like that. Still, it didn't look tampered with. Nothing missing. Food was sealed, gear untouched. Could have been nothing. I zipped it tight and sat down to boil water for tea, but I couldn't shake it. That tiny feeling of something being just slightly off. That night, the wind picked up. My tent flapped a little, and I lay in my bag listening. At around 2 or 3 a.m., I heard something. Not wind, not an animal. A soft crunch, like footsteps in leaves. Close, not right outside, but close. I froze. Every part of my body stiffened. I waited, heart pounding so hard I could hear the blood in my ears. The sound stopped after maybe 10 seconds. Silence again. Too much silence. Eventually, I told myself it was probably an animal. Maybe a deer. I waited another hour before I could fall back asleep. The next morning, everything looked the same. Nothing moved. Nothing missing. But the ground outside my tent looked pressed. Like someone had stepped there and disturbed the wet layer of leaves. I stood looking at it for a long time, telling myself it could have been mine. But the angle was wrong. I hadn't stepped there. I packed my day bag and hiked further west, but I kept checking over my shoulder. I didn't enjoy the walk like I had before. Every sound had weight now. Every bird call, every rustle in the undergrowth made my skin crawl. I kept thinking of those footprints and that crunching sound. The thought that someone might be watching crept in and wouldn't leave. When I returned late afternoon, my gut dropped again. My fire pit looked different. Nothing dramatic, just the stones were shifted slightly. One of the charred logs was gone. Just one. The others were still there. I walked in circles around my camp, checking everything. Tent untouched, pack in place, food sealed. But I didn't feel alone. I had that deep, crawling instinct like being watched from behind a curtain. I didn't light a fire that night. I ate cold bread and sausage and sat in silence with my back against a tree, facing the dark woods. Sometime after midnight, I saw something. I didn't hear anything first. I just felt it, the pressure of being observed. I looked out through a gap in the trees toward the darker part of the woods downhill, and I saw a man, or the shape of one, still, not moving, standing maybe 20 yards from the edge of my clearing. He was tall, wearing something dark. I couldn't see his face, just a figure standing between two trees. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. I just watched, and he didn't move either. He just stood. For how long, I don't know. Maybe a minute, maybe 10. Eventually, I blinked, and when I looked again, he was gone. I didn't sleep that night. I packed my things while it was still dark, snuffed every trace of my camp, and moved deeper into the woods before sunrise. I didn't want him to know I was leaving. I walked hard and fast for hours, heading south toward a road I remembered from past hikes. I didn't stop to eat. My legs burned. My back hurt. I didn't care. I just wanted to be where there were people. But the woods are thick out there, and I must have misjudged my route. The path I thought would take me out just circled back. When I realized I'd looped back near where I started, panic hit me. I dropped my pack and dry heaved in the underbrush. My mouth tasted like metal. I forced myself to calm down and got the compass out. Reoriented, took a long way around, found a dry stream bed and followed it downhill, hoping it would lead to some kind of road or path. That's when I saw something hanging from a tree. It was one of my socks. My red wool hiking sock, tied by the toe from a branch, swaying slightly in the breeze. I hadn't lost it. It had been in my bag. I dropped everything and just stood there staring at it. That's when I heard the crunch again. Behind me, closer than before. I didn't look back. I ran. I ran like I hadn't run in years. My knees screamed. My lungs burned. I didn't care. I crashed through undergrowth, took brambles to the face, stumbled into a thorn bush and kept running. I lost my direction, my bearings, everything. But I kept going until I saw a low stone wall and vaulted over it into a sheep field. I kept running until I found a tractor path and followed it, half limping, all the way to a farmer's shed. That was the first person I'd seen in 3 days. He looked at me like I'd crawled out of a ditch, and I probably looked like I had. Mud-covered, panting, pale, bleeding from one arm where a branch had cut me. I didn't explain much. I just asked for the nearest town and walked the road until I found a pub with a taxi number pinned to the door. I didn't call the police. What was I going to say? I didn't know who the man was. I didn't know what he wanted. I had no name,
No proof.
Just a sick feeling that if I'd stayed one more night, I wouldn't have walked out. I went home and didn't talk about it. I showered for almost an hour. I shaved. I cleaned the cuts. I put the gear away. I tried to tell myself it was nothing. Some local playing a prank. Someone hiking through. But then I remembered the sock, the fire pit, the footprints, the man. I didn't sleep right for months after that. I'd wake up and check the locks. I couldn't walk through woods without my stomach flipping. The peace I used to feel out there was gone. Ruined. That was 10 years ago now. I still hike sometimes. Short trails, nothing deep. Never alone. Never without a phone. And I never ever go back to the Peak District. Not because I think he's still out there, but because some part of me knows I was never supposed to see him. And the only reason I made it out was because I left before he was ready. It was late September 2012. I was 32 at the time, living in a small rented apartment in Birmingham, England, and dealing with the kind of burnout you don't realize is building up until it spills over. I worked long hours in a commercial plumbing business, mostly stuck inside concrete skeletons of buildings under construction, breathing in dust and arguing with site managers. I was in decent shape, but mentally I was fried. I had no kids, no partner at the time, and not much tying me to the city beyond bills and habit. So I decided to take a short solo camping trip. Nothing fancy, just me, a tent, and 2 days off. I figured a change of pace would help clear my head, give me room to think. I didn't want a busy caravan site or a national park crawling with people. I wanted quiet, real quiet, so I picked a spot I'd read about years before but had never been to, somewhere in the Forest of Boland. A small, unofficial clearing by a slow-moving river a few miles off the main trails. It wasn't on any modern maps, just something I remembered reading in an old hiking forum. People said it was hard to find, but peaceful once you got there. I packed up my old Nissan with basic supplies. Just enough food for a couple of days, a canteen, a water filter, tent, sleeping bag, flashlight, knife, first aid kit, tarp, and a few essentials. I left early Friday morning, driving for hours through winding rural roads. The last stretch was rough. No real path, just gravel and dirt. I had to park the car in a small levee and hike the rest of the way in. Maybe an hour and a half through patchy woodland, using a printed satellite image I'd marked up with guesses. By the time I found the river and the clearing next to it, the sun was already starting to dip. The place was perfect, quiet. The river moved slowly, almost like glass. Trees lined both banks, close enough to shade everything in a deep green hue. I set up my tent just out of sight of the water and cleared a small space for a fire. There were no trails nearby, no noise except the wind and the occasional rustle of birds in the canopy. Exactly what I needed. That first night, I made a small fire, heated a tin of beans, and sat beside the river for what felt like hours. It was cold, but not unbearably so, and I had packed extra layers. I slept surprisingly well. The next day, I woke early and walked along the riverbank, heading upstream with no real plan, just breathing the air and enjoying the absence of concrete, steel, and voices. I found tracks here and there, deer, maybe fox, but no people. I cooked around midday, read a bit in my tent, then stretched out on a tarp and watched the trees move overhead. By evening, I was already dreading going back to normal life, but something shifted that night. A small thing, feeling really, started when I saw the lights. Around 9 p.m., I was sitting near the fire again, watching the flames burn down. I had the flashlight with me, but I didn't need it yet. The moon was out, low and yellow behind the trees. I remember looking up, and between the branches, I noticed something strange in the distance. Not in the sky, on the ground. Lights. At first, I thought they might be campers, but these weren't the kind of warm, steady glows you get from tents or campfires. They looked more like flashlights or headlamps, but the movement was odd, too fast, jerky. I saw one, then two more. Small specks of white shifting in the woods across the river, maybe 150 meters away. Then they disappeared behind the trees. I told myself it was probably just hikers, maybe kids messing around. But I'd walked all around that area earlier and hadn't seen any sign of people.
No footprints. No camps.
Nothing. Still, I tried not to let it bother me. I doused the fire, went into the tent, zipped everything up, and listened. For a while, there was nothing, just the wind in the branches. But then I heard something that made my skin go cold. It was faint. I couldn't place it at first. Not talking, not footsteps, just a metallic sound, a clinking, like something being tapped lightly against metal. Not constant, every few seconds. I held my breath and sat up, straining to hear. Then it stopped. I didn't sleep much that night. By morning, there was no sign of anything unusual. I walked to the riverbank and scanned the opposite side. Nothing. No boot prints, no gear, no movement. I convinced myself it had just been distant lights, maybe a group passing through. I started to feel stupid for being so on edge. But something was different now. Couldn't settle. I didn't want to pack up and leave, not yet, but I didn't want to walk far from camp either. So I stayed close, rechecking my gear, gathering more firewood, filtering water from the river, trying to distract myself. Around 4 p.m., I spotted something across the water. A figure. It was too far to see clearly, but it was definitely a person. Standing still, just beyond a tree, facing my side of the river. I froze. They didn't move, just stood there, maybe watching, then slowly stepped back into the trees. I didn't go after them. I didn't yell. I just crouched there, breathing hard. The woods were still again, but every part of my body felt wrong, like something had tilted out of place. I packed my things slowly. I didn't want to make it obvious. I rolled up the sleeping bag and took down the tent, but left the firewood stacked like I was staying. I kept one bag packed with food and clothes, but left the backpack zipped shut like normal. I wanted whoever or whatever was out there to think I was staying one more night. I moved my packed gear just behind the tree line, near a group of thick roots and mossy rocks. It gave me a partial view of the camp, but kept me hidden. I waited there as the sun dropped. Around 8 p.m., I saw the lights again. This time there were 4 of them, moving across the river, coming closer, not in a straight line, more like a slow arc, as if they were circling. Every now and then, one would stop, then flicker and vanish, only to reappear again in a different spot. They didn't cross the water, but they were watching the campsite, watching my tent. I stayed perfectly still behind the roots. I don't know how long it lasted. The lights blinked out one by one. Maybe an hour passed, then silence. Then I heard the metal sound again, closer now. A soft clink, clink, clink. Then nothing. I didn't sleep at all that night. At first light, I grabbed my things and left everything else behind. Tent poles, the tarp, extra food. I hiked hard, barely stopping, checking over my shoulder the whole way. The forest felt different now, like it was watching me. Every sound made me jump. A bird, a squirrel, a branch shifting. It all felt wrong. I got back to the car just before noon. Nothing was touched. I started it up and drove straight home without stopping. For weeks after that, I kept thinking about those lights, about that figure by the tree, about the sound of metal. Eventually, curiosity got the better of me. I searched online, went back to that old forum thread, and tried to find the place again. The thread was gone. No cached version, no archives, just dead links. I looked up incidents in the area, missing persons, police reports, found nothing concrete. Just one article from 2007. A paragraph buried in a local paper about hikers finding a crude campsite full of animal bones and handmade tools near the same forest.
No arrests. No suspects.
No follow-up. I've never been back. I still hike sometimes, but never alone. Never anywhere without marked trails and cell service. And every time I see someone standing too still in the woods, I think of that shape across the river and wonder how long it watched me before I saw it. I should have left when I saw the lights, but I didn't, and I'll never forget that sound. Clink, clink, clink. It was in late October of 2013, and I was 35 back then. I'd been working in construction nonstop for over 8 months, and the noise, the deadlines, and the constant hammering had started to crawl under my skin. I needed to get away, just for a weekend. I didn't want a beach, I didn't want crowds. I wanted silence, solitude, maybe some cold wind through the trees. So I drove north into Scotland and parked my car near the edge of a logging road a few miles past the village of Canich. That place, Glen Affric, has always had a pull on me. It's thick with forest, and there's a quiet that settles over it when the clouds drop low that I've never quite found anywhere else. I packed light, just my green rucksack, a one-man tent, a sleeping bag, and some dried food. I brought a small burner, a headlamp, my old knife, and a waterproof jacket I trusted. I hadn't brought a phone. I didn't want it buzzing. I didn't even want the option to check the time. Just the woods and the sound of my boots pressing into the mud. It was cloudy when I set off, late in the morning, and the sun had only peeked through a few times as I hiked deeper into the forest. The trees were mostly pine and birch, a mix of yellow leaves and sharp green needles. The air was cold and wet-smelling. After about 4 hours of walking, I found a patch of ground by a narrow stream that looked flat enough to camp on. There was a steep hill on one side, and the woods opened just enough to let the light through. I set up the tent, boiled water, and made some instant noodles. I sat on a rock, warm bowl in my hands, watching the stream gurgle over mossy stones. That first night passed without anything strange. I remember sleeping well, even though the wind picked up sometime after midnight and rattled the fly sheet. I woke around 8 a.m. to gray skies and the smell of damp earth. My boots were cold and my jacket still smelled of smoke from the small fire I'd built the night before. The next day, I wandered farther from camp with my knife in my belt and a bottle of water in my jacket. The forest was thick, and the trails weren't marked, so I tied strips of red cloth to some of the trees every 50 yards to find my way back. It rained lightly around noon, but only for an hour. The woods had this deep hush to them that day.
No birds.
No movement, just wind through trees and my boots crunching wet undergrowth. I followed deer tracks for a while but lost them near a patch of heather. I turned back before the light started to fade. I didn't want to rely on the headlamp. That evening I ate jerky and some hard biscuits. My lighter was damp, so I didn't bother with a fire. I crawled into the tent early, around 6 p.m., and listened to the rain start again. Soft at first, then stronger. The tent flapped and shifted with the gusts. I felt at ease, though. That sound, the rain on nylon, has always helped me sleep. It was sometime past midnight when I woke up. I didn't sit up right away. I opened my eyes slowly. The rain had stopped. The wind had died too. It was dead quiet, and that's what pulled me out of sleep. That silence. It wasn't natural. Not in those woods. There's always something. A distant owl, a branch creaking, the stream. But this was flat silence, like someone had dropped a blanket over the world. I stayed still. My ears adjusted, and I strained them. Nothing. I figured maybe the weather had just stilled everything. I unzipped the sleeping bag a little. The tent felt warm and dry, but the air outside smelled sharp, like mud and wet bark. Then I heard it, a stick snapping. Not loud, not close, but not far either. Maybe 20 or 30 feet from the tent. It wasn't wind. It wasn't an animal. It was too deliberate. I stayed still. Another snap, then a soft crunch. Leaves or twigs under something heavy. It stopped. A pause. Then another slow step. I wasn't sure what to do. I didn't have a gun. My knife was in the side pouch of the tent. I quietly, as slowly as I could, slid my hand over and unzipped the pouch. My fingers found the cold grip and I pulled it close to my chest. My heartbeat was loud in my ears. I could feel it in my throat. More steps, still slow, closer now. Then silence again. I waited. 10 seconds, maybe 20. Nothing. Then I heard breathing. Not mine. Out there. It was soft, but just loud enough to make the hair on my arms rise. Someone or something was standing just outside the trees watching the tent. I thought maybe it was a lost hiker, but it was nearly 1 a.m. now. What hiker walks around in pitch dark, in a remote forest, during rain? My light was off. My fire was out. My tent was the same dull brown as the forest floor. You'd have to know exactly where I was to find it in that blackness. Unless they'd followed me. I slowly reached up and unzipped the top corner of the tent. Just a sliver. I peeked out. Pitch black.
No mon.
Just a few faint shadows from the trees. But I saw movement, just for a second. A shape between two trees. Tall, still, facing me. I closed the zipper again and held my breath. I didn't sleep. I lay there gripping the knife until my hand cramped. I didn't move. I listened. Eventually, I heard steps again, this time moving away. Slow, then faster, then fading. I waited another half hour, maybe longer, before I unzipped the tent and stepped out into the night. The air was cold and wet. I turned on my headlamp and pointed it toward the trees. Nothing. I circled the tent. No tracks, but the ground was wet and soft. Any footprints might have been washed out by the earlier rain. I went back inside and stayed up until the gray light of morning started to seep through the trees. When I finally stepped out again, the forest looked normal. Birds were calling. The stream bubbled like always, but I packed up. Fast. I knew I hadn't imagined it. There had been someone there, watching. I could feel it in my gut. I thought about leaving, hiking straight back to the car. But something in me didn't want to let whoever that was push me out. I'd camped before all over Scotland, even some parts of Norway. I'd never had anything like that happen. So I decided I'd move camp. A few miles in a new direction. Maybe closer to the road, but not so close that I'd be seen from it. I hiked hard for the next 4 hours, heading east. I didn't take breaks. I kept checking behind me. I didn't see anyone. Didn't hear anything, but I kept looking. By late afternoon, I found another spot. It was on a small rise with thicker trees around. Not as open as before, but that felt safer, less exposed. I pitched the tent fast, found a few dry branches under a pine tree, and got a fire going. I even cooked some can stew I'd packed for emergencies. Felt good to eat something hot. The rain started again around sunset, heavier this time, thick drops pounding the tent roof. I sat inside with the knife close. I didn't sleep much. Every noise made me sit up. Every gust made me flinch. But nothing happened that night. I thought maybe it had just been a passing wanderer. Maybe some old local. Maybe he saw my camp and got curious. Creeped me out, sure, but maybe not dangerous. By the third day, I started to relax a little. I walked a bit in the morning. Not far, just near the ridge. I saw deer again, heard a woodpecker. The forest felt alive again. I told myself the first camp had just been in a bad spot. Maybe near someone's hidden cabin or old hunting route. The sky stayed gray all afternoon. I spent most of the day gathering firewood, keeping things dry, boiling more water, cleaning out my pot. The normal things. But by late evening, the air started to shift. That kind of quiet came back. Not as strong as the first night, but enough to notice. The birds stopped again. No wind, just the patter of rain starting up. I ate quickly, stuffed my gear into the dry bags, and zipped myself into the tent. Around midnight, I heard something again. A soft scrape, then another. It wasn't walking this time. It was slower, dragging. Then it stopped. I sat there, holding the knife, staring at the tent wall. Then came the breathing, same as before. Only this time it was right outside the tent. Heavy. Bit. Like someone was trying to stay quiet but couldn't help the sound. Then I saw it. A shadow. Someone walked around the tent. Slow. Deliberate.
No flashlight. No noise.
Just that shape. I didn't move. Then came the sound of fabric. The sound of a finger or a knife dragging slowly along the side of the tent. It scraped all the way around. Not cutting, just touching. Then it stopped. I didn't breathe. I didn't blink. The breathing got closer again. Then silence. 5 seconds. 10. Then the steps moved off. Faster this time. Then gone. I didn't move for over an hour. Then I crawled out and lit the fire again. I didn't sleep at all. I packed everything the moment daylight hit the trees. I didn't eat. I didn't stop. I just hiked, fast and straight, following my map and compass until I reached the road. My car was untouched. I didn't look back. I got in, soaked and muddy, and drove for hours without stopping. I didn't even listen to the radio. A week later, when I'd gotten back to my flat in Birmingham, I went through my gear. Everything was wet and smelled like pine. But when I checked the tent carefully, I found something that made my stomach drop. A small cut on the back panel, about 6 inches long. Clean, straight, a blade. It hadn't gone through the mesh, so I didn't notice it from inside. But it was fresh. Someone had tried to cut into the tent while I was inside. Not just watch me, not just scare me. They'd tried to come in. I haven't camped alone since, and I never will again. It was 2016 when I decided to go camping alone in northern Arizona. I was 29 at the time, living in Phoenix, working a job that was slowly grinding me down. The city was loud, hot, and busy. I needed a break from all of it. I wanted trees, silence, fresh air. I had camped a few times before with friends, but this time I wanted to do it alone, off-grid, out of cell service. I figured it would clear my head. I chose a spot just outside of a town called Williams, not too far from Kaibab National Forest. I had done some research and found a Forest Service road that went deep into the woods with no official campsites, just random clearings people had used before. I drove out on a Friday morning early. My truck was packed with supplies, tent, food, water, a small propane stove, firewood, and my rifle. I always brought it more for peace of mind than anything else. The road into the forest was rough, narrow, with deep ruts. I followed it for about an hour, seeing no other cars. Every mile I drove, the trees got thicker and the feeling of being truly alone grew. Eventually, I found a small clearing on a slope that looked out over a thick pine valley. No signs of recent use. I parked the truck and walked around to be sure. Felt right. I set up my tent about 30 yards from the truck, just beyond a few clusters of rocks. From there, I had a clear view down the hill. It was quiet. No sounds except wind in the trees and the occasional chirp of birds. I got a small fire going and made coffee. It was the most peaceful I had felt in years. That first day was calm. I walked a bit, checked the area for water sources, but mostly sat around reading and relaxing. By the time night fell, I was exhausted and went to bed early. I had a flashlight and my rifle within arm's reach in the tent. just in case. There were the usual night sounds: branches creaking, something moving through brush far away, but nothing strange. On the second day, I woke early and decided to hike down the hill into the valley. It looked shallow from the top, but it was deeper than I expected. I made it down in about an hour, marking trees along the way so I wouldn't get lost. There were signs of old animal paths, maybe deer or elk. I didn't see any fresh tracks though. Down in the valley, the trees were packed tight. Less light came through the canopy. I found a dry creek bed and followed it east for a while. The place was beautiful but quiet in a strange way. It felt like a place people didn't go often. After a couple hours, I turned back and made it back to camp by afternoon. That night, something felt off. It started just after sunset. The woods got too quiet.
No bugs, no rustling.
Even the wind had died. I sat by the fire with a strange tightness in my chest. I kept telling myself it was just isolation playing with my nerves, but something in my gut kept twisting. Around 11 p.m., I heard movement. Not the kind animals make, it was rhythmic, heavy. Came from down the hill. I killed the fire and crouched low, straining to listen. The sounds were slow footsteps on pine needles, breaking twigs every few steps. It wasn't charging, just moving, steady. I waited, rifle in hand. After 5 minutes, the sound stopped. Nothing. I stayed like that for nearly an hour, then finally crawled into my tent and zipped it shut, not turning on any light. I didn't sleep. I just lay there, eyes wide open, every little sound pulling my nerves tighter. Nothing else happened that night. The next morning, I looked around the camp. No signs of anything. No tracks, no damage. I told myself it was probably a deer or elk wandering by, but I had heard deer before. This wasn't that. I should have left that morning, but I had convinced myself it was nothing. I didn't want to look like a coward to myself. I spent the day staying close to camp, cutting firewood, keeping busy. I had a radio, no signal. I walked a little but didn't go far. That evening, I got the fire going again, cooked a bit of food, and tried to enjoy the last night of the trip. The woods stayed quiet. No wind, no birds, just silence. By 9 p.m., the fire had died down and I sat in the dark, just listening. That's when I heard it again. This time it came from the right side of the clearing. Slow, spaced footsteps. Then they stopped. A full 10 minutes passed with nothing. Then I heard something knock against a tree. Not hard, just one dull thud. Then silence again. I crouched behind a rock, rifle ready, heart hammering in my chest. I waited. 30 minutes passed. Nothing. Then a branch snapped behind me, closer than I expected. I spun around and aimed, but saw nothing in the dark. I held still for what felt like hours. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Then I heard what I still can't explain. A small rustling sound, right behind the tent, then nothing. I packed up before dawn, threw everything into the truck without even folding the tent. I didn't eat, didn't look back. I just drove. The forest road seemed longer than before. Every shadow between trees made me grip the wheel tighter. By the time I hit pavement, I felt like I had escaped something. I made it to a gas station near Flagstaff and just sat in the lot for a long time, trying to calm myself. I didn't talk to anyone. I didn't tell anyone the full story for years. A few weeks later, I went online and looked up missing persons reports in that area. Found 3 in the last 5 years. One was a guy who vanished from a hunting trip just 20 miles from where I had camped. Another was a woman hiking solo. The third was a couple, last seen driving into the woods. Their truck was found, camp intact, no sign of them. I still don't know what I heard. I never saw anything, never got proof. But I know I wasn't alone out there. And whatever it wasn't curious. It was watching. I haven't camped alone since. I still hike, still spend time in the woods, but never off-grid, never without signal. Some places don't want you there. Some places have been quiet too long. And sometimes, silence isn't peaceful. It's warning you. I was 31 when I decided to go camping alone for the first time. It was late summer of 2014. My girlfriend and I had broken up a few months earlier, and I'd been stuck in this weird emotional fog, sleeping in late, scrolling endlessly through my phone, watching too much TV. I needed something to break the cycle, something simple, just me and nature. No phone, no music, just silence and air and trees. I live in Kent, down in the southeast of England, but for this trip, I picked a small spot up in the Forest of Boland, Lancashire. It's not as tourist-heavy as the Lake District, and I'd read online that there were lots of quiet places where wild camping was tolerated if you kept a low profile. I packed up my gear: cheap but reliable tent, sleeping bag, basic stove, tinned food, water, compass, headlamp, lighter, a decent fixed-blade knife, and a few other essentials. I drove up in my old Volkswagen Golf, parked it along a country lane near a farming village called Newton Boland, and walked the rest of the way in. The spot I picked was a small clearing near a riverbed, a good 25-minute hike from the nearest visible path. I didn't see a single soul after the first 10 minutes of walking. No other campers.
No hikers.
Not even a farmer. The riverbed was low and mostly dry, just patches of shallow water weaving around smooth stones and fallen branches. Behind it was a line of thick trees, and behind them, the land sloped up into some rocky hills. It was peaceful, almost too quiet. I set up my tent around 4 p.m., boiled some water for tea, and sat on a flat rock near the river, watching the trees sway. It was everything I wanted.
No noise.
No pressure. Just the sounds of insects and wind and the trickling water. For the first time in months, I felt my shoulders drop and my mind settle. As night fell, I lit a small fire in a circle of stones I had built. I roasted a few sausages I'd brought, ate a can of beans, and lay back on my mat, looking at the sky. There were more stars than I ever saw back home. It got cold quickly, so I crawled into my sleeping bag and zipped up the tent. My plan was to stay out here for 3 nights, maybe 4 if I felt up to it. I woke up around 3 a.m. that first night because I had to piss. I unzipped the tent and stepped out, half asleep. The fire had burned out. The cold hit me like a slap. Everything was dark and dead silent, the kind of silence that hums in your ears. I walked a little into the trees to relieve myself, using my headlamp on its lowest setting. That's when I felt something strange. Not saw, felt. Like a weight behind my ribs. I turned the light off and stood still. It was completely black. No moon, no stars through the trees. Just black and the faint sound of the river. There was nothing there. I told myself that and went back to the tent. But something in me had tightened. I couldn't sleep after that. I kept thinking about the quiet, how even the birds weren't making noise. The next day, I hiked around the area, looking at some nearby rock formations, just keeping my mind busy. By the afternoon, I was more relaxed again. I made a small stew for dinner and sat by the fire, watching steam drift off the metal pot. At some point, I looked across the riverbed. On the other side, right near the edge of the trees, I saw something. A shape. I thought it might have been a deer or a large dog at first, low to the ground, but still. I blinked a few times. It didn't move. I got up and took a few steps closer, but the firelight didn't reach that far. I thought maybe I was seeing a bush or a stump or a boulder that caught the light funny. But the weird thing was, I didn't remember seeing anything there earlier. I stayed close to camp that night. I didn't sleep much again. The silence was even heavier, like the air was full of dust. I could barely hear the river anymore. I kept imagining footsteps outside the tent. Not loud stomps, just slow, careful steps. I kept sitting up and unzipping the flap, but every time, I saw nothing. I started leaving my knife under my sleeping bag. On the third day, I made a decision. I wouldn't stay for the fourth night. Something wasn't right. I couldn't explain it, but I trusted my gut. It wasn't fear exactly, more like tension that wouldn't let go, like being watched from far away. That evening, I packed up most of my stuff, except the tent and what I needed for the night. I planned to wake up early and hike back to the car by sunrise. I went to sleep early. I tried to block everything out and just force my body to shut down. I must have drifted off around 10 or 11. I woke up again in the middle of the night, but this time it wasn't because I had to piss. I didn't hear anything. I didn't see anything. I just woke up all at once, heart pounding, like someone had grabbed me. I lay there completely still, eyes open in the dark. I heard a sound, a scraping sound, like metal dragging across stone. Came from across the riverbed. Then it stopped. I slowly reached over and unzipped the inner tent flap just a little, enough to slide my hand out. I grabbed the knife. Then I unzipped the outer flap, just a bit. I waited, 10 seconds, 20. Then I heard it again, a slow scrape, and this time a crunch of a footstep. Not close, maybe 30 or 40 feet away, but definite. Couldn't breathe right. My lungs weren't working properly. My mouth felt like it was full of dust. I pushed the flap open and looked out. My fire was just glowing embers now. Then, in that faint orange glow, I saw something at the far end of the clearing. It was a man, not walking, not moving. He was crouched down by the edge of the river on my side. I hadn't heard him cross. He wasn't doing anything, just crouched there, arms on his knees, face turned straight at my tent. I pulled the flap closed slowly and sat there. I couldn't think clearly. Every instinct I had was screaming not to move, not to make a sound. Then I heard him stand, that soft, slow shift of weight. Another footstep, then another, closer now. I got out of the sleeping bag and crouched with the knife. I didn't want to run. Running blind into the woods would be worse. I didn't want to yell. I didn't want him to know I was awake. The footsteps stopped just a few feet from the tent. Then silence again. Minutes passed, or maybe it was seconds. Couldn't tell. My legs were shaking. My teeth were clenched so tight I thought they might crack. Then, suddenly, a shadow moved over the tent wall. A hand just rested there. He was touching the tent, pressing it gently. Then he walked around it. I saw the shadows shift. Then nothing. No footsteps walking away.
No sounds.
I waited. I must have sat like that for an hour. Finally, when the sky started to turn faint gray-blue, I packed everything up silently. I didn't even roll up the tent. I just grabbed what I could, stuffed it into the bag, and left the tent behind. I didn't eat, didn't drink. I just walked. I got to my car and drove. I didn't look in the mirrors. I just kept my eyes forward. My hands shook the whole drive back to Kent. For a while, I thought maybe I imagined it, that I'd freaked myself out. But 2 weeks later, I read a small article online about a missing hiker up near Newton Boland.
A solo camper.
Tent found slashed to pieces. No signs of struggle. No blood. Just gone. I don't know if it was the same place I camped, but it was close. I haven't gone camping alone since. I still go with friends sometimes in proper campsites with phone reception and lights and other people around. But I'll never forget that feeling. The way he crouched there, still, watching, waiting, and how quiet everything was, like the whole forest was holding its breath. I never liked camping with other people. They were always too loud or too messy, or forgot something important like water or a flashlight or even toilet paper. I was 32 when I started going out into the hills of northern Arizona on my own, and it quickly became one of the few things that brought me peace. I lived in a little town called Clarkdale. It's tucked between Jerome and Cottonwood, not far from Sedona, but quieter than all of them. You could walk out your door and be in the foothills in minutes. I worked construction during the week, roofing mostly, and saved all my days off for weekends in the wild. The red rocks, dry creeks, endless juniper trees. They made my head quiet in a way the town never could. I always camped rough. No big tents or radios or coolers full of beer. Just a tarp, a bedroll, a small gas stove, a cheap pack, and a 9mm Glock I kept tucked under my sleeping bag. I didn't bring it because I was afraid of bears or mountain lions. I brought it because you never really know who else might be out there. I remember the weekend like it was yesterday, even though it's been 4 years. It was mid-September, 2021. The heat was finally breaking. Days were warm but not unbearable, and nights were crisp. Perfect weather for a long hike. I drove north on 89A toward Flagstaff and turned off near a little forest road that wasn't even marked. I'd found it a year before and saved it in my GPS. It led to a spot you couldn't see from the road. No fire rings, no trash, no signs of people at all. Just pine trees and red dirt and the occasional mule deer trail winding through the undergrowth. I parked where the road gave out and hiked in with everything on my back. Took about 2 hours to get to my usual spot. It was a little hollow between two ridges, shaded by big ponderosa pines, with a sloping rock wall to one side that helped block the wind. I set up my tarp between two trees, cleared out pine needles, and rolled out my bedroll. I boiled water for freeze-dried chili, made a fire, and sat in the dirt, staring at the flames until the sun dipped low behind the trees. The first night was quiet, cold but not bad. The fire crackled, the wind whispered through the trees, and nothing strange happened. I slept hard and woke early, made instant coffee, packed a small bag, and set out to explore the ridge to the north. I was gone most of the day, climbed over deadfall, followed deer tracks, found an old dried-out creek. The land out there looks empty from the road, but when you're deep in it, the woods are full of movement. Lizards, birds, the occasional distant rustle of something bigger. When I got back around dusk, everything was where I left it. Pack, tarp, even my water bottle. I made a fire and cooked again. Sat watching the flames until full dark, then tucked into my sleeping bag with the Glock by my side, just like always. That night is when things started to feel wrong. I woke up sometime after midnight. It wasn't a noise that did it. I just opened my eyes like something inside me had nudged me awake. The fire had died down to embers. The forest was completely still. No wind, no crickets, not even the usual creak of trees shifting in the cold. Just dead silence. Took me a minute to realize I wasn't alone. I didn't hear footsteps. I didn't see anyone, but I knew something was near my camp. It was that feeling you get when someone stands behind you in line too close, even if you haven't turned around yet. Every hair on my neck stood up. My chest got tight. I stayed in my bag and reached slowly for the Glock. Then I heard it, very faint movement, like a foot dragging through leaves, just beyond the edge of the firelight. Too heavy for a rabbit or squirrel. Too slow for a deer. I held my breath and listened. Another shuffle. Closer this time. I sat up and clicked on my flashlight. Swung it around the trees in front of me. Nothing. The beam lit up bark and pine needles and the edge of the boulder to my left. But there wasn't anyone there. I stood slowly, still in my socks, and took a few steps away from the fire. My breath showed in the cold. I swept the light in a full circle. Still nothing, but the feeling didn't go away. I stood there for maybe a full minute, listening, not moving. Then I backed toward my bedroll, sat down again, and kept the flashlight and the gun in my lap until I was too tired to keep my eyes open. I told myself in the morning it had just been a deer. but I didn't believe it. The next day, I didn't go hiking. I stayed close to camp, rearranged my tarp so I could see in every direction, gathered extra wood, spent the afternoon sharpening my hatchet and reading an old paperback I'd brought. Every so often I would stop and listen. The forest still sounded normal in the daytime. Wind through trees, the buzz of flies, birdsong. But under that there was something else, a quiet tension, like the trees were watching me. That night I built the fire high, kept it burning longer than usual, ate my food fast and cleaned up every trace, packed everything into my bag except the sleeping gear and gun. I lay there for hours listening, and then, just after 2 a.m., I heard a sound I'll never forget. It was my name, not whispered, not shouted, just said in a flat, weird tone, like someone trying to speak through a mouth that didn't work right. It came from the woods behind me, where the rock wall cast deep shadows even in the firelight. Said it once, then silence. I didn't move. I didn't turn around. I stared into the fire and tried not to breathe. Then I heard it again, closer, my name, but it wasn't right. It had the wrong rhythm, like whoever or whatever said it didn't understand what it meant. Then I heard footsteps, slow, heavy, crunching through dry pine needles, coming closer. I stood, gun raised, and spun around. Nothing. I pointed the flashlight in the direction of the voice. Still nothing, but I didn't imagine it. I swear on my life I heard it. Something in those woods said my name, and it didn't sound human. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. As soon as the sun rose, I packed everything. Fast. Didn't even make coffee. Just threw my gear together and started the hike back to the truck. The trail looked different on the way out. I'd walked it 2 days before and knew every bend, but now things were wrong. Trees in different places, rocks I didn't remember. I started to wonder if I'd taken a wrong turn. Then I saw footprints. Not mine, not boot prints. Bare feet, bare human feet. But the toes were long, too long, and the prints didn't look right. The heel shape was wrong, and they weren't just crossing the trail, they were following it. Following the same path I was taking. I sped up, didn't stop for water, didn't stop to check the GPS, just kept walking, faster and faster, glancing over my shoulder every few minutes. The sun was up, but it didn't help. Every shadow between the trees looked like something hiding. When I finally reached my truck, I didn't even put the gear in the bed. I threw it in the passenger seat and peeled out, gravel spraying from the tires. I didn't breathe easy until I hit pavement again. When I got home, I showered twice, locked every door, slept with the lights on. For days I kept checking outside at night, thinking I'd see something standing in the yard, but nothing came. I didn't go camping again for 6 months. When I finally did, it was with 2 friends, and I brought a rifle as well as the Glock. But I never went back to that spot. Never even got close. I spent a lot of time reading after that. Not just regular stuff, folklore, local legends. I didn't believe in that kind of thing before. Skinwalkers, shapeshifters, witches. Sounded like movie nonsense. But some stories were too close to what I'd seen. People who'd heard their own names spoken in the woods. People who'd followed trails that shifted around them. People who saw things pretending to be human, but not quite managing it. I stopped telling myself I imagined it. I didn't. I don't know what I saw or what saw me, but it was out there in the hills near Clarkdale. And it wasn't a bear. It wasn't a man. It wasn't anything that belonged in those woods. I've never gone camping alone again. I never will. And if you ever hear your own name whispered by something you can't see, run.